But to prevent people from seeing you before you're ready,
I'm
don't turn on your
Yep.
Hello, everyone. We are live and in a big lifetime learning experience. Lindsay is in the background helping me out. Lindsay, are you going to show yourself? And we're going to bring on our guest speaker. And in the meantime, I'm also going to double check that we are live on Facebook. Lindsay, can you confirm that?
We are getting started. I can see it buffering.
Great. Okay, well, hopefully we're all live on Facebook. And there's Graham, our guest. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really, really appreciate it. We're all big fans, of course. And I feel like we're in good hands with you as our first guest.
All right, well, I suppose I should get started. So first, I'm in my upstairs room in Leverett, Massachusetts. I'm completely surrounded by ladybugs, which I think you cannot see on camera, but trust me, they're there. First and foremost, I want to thank Darlene for this wonderful inspiration and Lindsay for making the technological aspects all happen. So let me just jump in, and this is all quite novel for me as well. So I'm going to touch on a few ideas, expand upon them a little bit. We've gotten several wonderful questions from participants in anticipation of this webinar. So I want to leave a lot of time for those questions. I hope some of you who are watching along, listening along on Facebook or on the webinar directly have more questions, and we can field some of those as well. So I'm very happy to do all of that. So 5 things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 different people and 3 different concepts. And I'll tackle each one, and I hope you'll beg my pardon as I'll sometimes turn and refer to frankly, my book, because I want to get some of the facts right and make sure I don't make any mistakes about dates and other silly things. So let me start with a concept that I think in English country dance is, I've come to conclude, is absolutely primal, absolutely central for the form. And conveniently enough, it is perhaps also the very oldest figure in the dance, as far as we can discern. References to, and I have in mind particularly the hay. And the hay, in English country dance circles, we know typically referred to as the hay. In Scottish tradition, it has become the reel. And I can say a little bit of something about some distinctions that were beginning to be made between reels and hays in the later 18th century, and are a little, not quite the same now, but I can say a little bit more about that. But reference to the hay really predates any very convincing reference to country dance. So there are references to doing a hay digi of 3. Digi is unclear. I have read some people insist that it has to do with the noble house of Guise, and therefore it's French. I think that's unproven, but is tantalizing. But a hay digi of 3, and we start to get references to the hay in the first quarter and then the second quarter of the 16th century. So that's goes a long way back. And I'm going to turn to a passage that I quoted in the introduction to the book, which talks about, it's from Sir John Davies in his wonderful, bizarre, long poem called Orchestra, or a Poem of Dancing. And he talks about the universe itself as being engaged in dance, and the dance is impelled by love, which drives the 4 basic elements that were believed in at the time of earth, air, fire, and water to engage in a kind of dance. Since when they are carried in a round and changing, come one in another's place, yet do they neither mingle nor confound, but everyone doth keep the bounded space wherein the dance doth bid it turn or trace or follow, like the lines of a figure. And love teaches humankind rounds and winding haze to tread. So this figure, I think, is absolutely central. We sometimes talk about progression itself as being a central component of English country dance, but we all know that in set dances, you may progress and then go back. So progression is not inevitable. It's not the only operation. Of course, there are dances without hays, but I think the hay is a really central figure, partly that it is involves more than, just to use an old-fashioned sexist phrase, more than a man and his maid. So it involves the idea that English country dance is more than a couple dance. So it's a little bit different from some of the presentation pieces of the Renaissance, which are wonderful dances for a man and a woman. So it makes sure that it involves a society, even a small society. And that it has this concept of shifting, changing, winding, turning, right? So this whole forward and back, or out and again, out and in, that I think is absolutely crucial to the expression. And I have, it's my bugbear lately. I've started to see the notion the broad notion of the hay as expressed in many, many of our oldest figures. And what I mean by that is that if you think of yourself as positioned somewhere in the middle of a hay for three, whether you're the initiator of the hay of hay for three or you're at each end of the hay, that you move, pardon my using this, for some people don't like this, but you move, let us say, clockwise and then counterclockwise, and clockwise and counterclockwise. And that's exactly what the Davies quote talks about, this winding in and out, back and forth. So there's a tension and release pattern in the figure itself. And that tension and release pattern explains what we talk about as satisfying flow, that you move one direction and then the other in a way that gratifies the body. And you can see this in the old figures too, if you circle one way and then the other. If you star by the right hand and then by the other. If you turn your corner by the right hand and then your partner by the left, right? This is exactly, I'm not suggesting that these figures are hays. They are not hays. But what they do is to do at different levels what the hay does for the three dancers. So I think the hay is a hugely important thing, and this will link us to some of the things we'll say a little later on, because I'm looking at the questions. Notice me touching my face constantly. And it's, by the same token, I think it's one of the trickier figures to teach to new dancers. It is the thing that really is not expected. In circles, you're grounded and bonded to other dancers, and turns and so on. And the haze is tricky. One of my early English country dance teachers say the hays are mysterious. They are mysterious. So what I wanted to go on to say a little bit more about hays, and then I'll leave them behind unless we choose to return to them later on, is that, so this kind of classic form is this hay for three, and which seems to be expressed here. There are certainly hays for four. For early on in the tradition, there are a number of the set dances that involve hays on the men's side, hays on the women's side, and we know that there are variation hays. There are chaining hays, hays with hands. There are hays initiated by the top couple going all the way around, and the supporting couples going up and down their sides and so on. So there are many variations of this winding figure, but it's important to remember that it has this out and back tension and release pattern that is so important. In the hay acquires a kind of a separate life, in the sense that we don't know all that we would like to about the development of this kind of hay, but certainly by the third quarter of the 18th century, reeling is available to you as a separate form of entertainment, which sometimes isn't even quite classed with country dances, which you might do in a large group. But it's something that you could do as a form of exercise and entertainment, and that it's very much associated with the Scots, or begins to be at this period, but I think it was done in other places as well, even outside Scotland. And that could be for 3, 4, maybe 5 if you were feeling adventurous. And the custom of reeling at that point in the tradition was that you might have your fiddler or piper playing a tune of some set length, and you start, you reel for 8 bars, and then you foot it on the spot for another 8 bars, and then you reel some more and you foot it on the spot for 8 bars. So it acquires as kind of a separate life. All right, I think that's enough probably about the hay on the reel for now. So let me turn to a person, and this is again one of my great favorites from the period, and one of the virtues of working on a project like the Playford Assembly is that it brings you in contact with fascinating figures. Most of you won't be surprised that I'm going to name Barbara Campanini as I think probably everyone's favorite woman crush in the 18th century. And the dance that bears her name, or version of her nickname, La Barbarina, is of course a favorite, and deservedly so. And I think reflects her spirit rather well, given that she almost certainly didn't write it, and almost certainly didn't write the tune. Very, very unlikely to have written the tune. But she's a fascinating figure, and she was a pistol. She was just a pistol. She was born in 1721 in Parma, and she was a kind of a prodigy as a young dancer. She, if some of you follow or read histories of ballet, she turns up in the early history of ballet as a pioneering figure, like La Camargo and Marie Salé, who were Salé was a real rival of hers, slightly older rival of hers. And so they are become prominent as dancers at a point when what the English would have called French style dancing or fancy dancing was beginning to shape itself into something like early ballet out of the tradition of the Baroque. And so she was this phenomenon. So before she was 20, she had conquered the hearts of Europe and toured the major capitals, and made a huge splash there. And she was famed for her ability to do entrechat-huit, so to whip her legs back and forth very quickly. She was called the Flying Goddess because she was so fast, so quick and so lively, and she had beautiful dark eyes. And there's there are several likenesses of her painted, and one of them I have seen, oh actually two of them I've seen in Berlin, in one of the royal palaces there, and I'll say a little bit more about how there come to be portraits of her in Berlin. And she, Frederick the Great of Prussia became enamored of her and was convinced that she absolutely had to go and work for him. She was resistant to this. We're not exactly clear why, but partly she just didn't want to be captured. And Frederick the Great was not at all interested in women, except as artistic figures. So anything you read that says she was his presumed mistress is fanciful. So she endeavored to escape from her contract with him by agreeing to run off with a Scottish aristocrat named James Stuart Mackenzie. And they zipped off to Venice in violation of a draft contract that she had made with Frederick the Great. They were apprehended in Venice. There was basically an international diplomatic scandal to get her back to Prussia and to get her to break off her presumed engagement to Mackenzie. And 1748, she had just absolutely had it. And there was a young Prussian nobleman, Karl Ludwig von Kocheri, who became enamored of her, and he, during one of her performances in 1748, he leapt onto the stage to declare his love for her and ask her to marry him in public, and she accepted. So huge scandal erupts, and she eventually negotiated her way out of her contract with Frederick the Great, and had her marriage. The marriage went on for some period, during which she actually became a salon hostess. Who knows how she acquired the skill and education to be a fashionable salon hostess, but she did it. Eventually, her nobleman husband's affections wandered, and rather than pine, she negotiated a divorce, and with a substantial income of her own, and demanded the title of countess under her own name, Countess Campanini. Wow. And she negotiated this with Frederick the Great on the grounds, or with the condition that she leave her estates and her holdings to the state of Prussia, and to use it to endow a charitable foundation that was going to be in the later 18th century. There were what were courteously called nunneries, but they were really genteel retirement homes for noble ladies. So this was a nunnery, but it was for 9 Protestant and 9 Catholic retired ladies. And she was the titular abbess of this abbey. So she was a remarkable thing, and that's how she comes to be in 2 paintings by Antoine Payne in Berlin. I've seen them both. There's a half-length portrait of her, and there's a full-length portrait of her, and it's not hard to find the good images of those online. She continued to be a figure in German and Prussian popular culture. There are actually 2 movies, very fanciful movies, made in the 1950s that were based on her life. So she's well known in Germany to this day. And I like her not only because she's fun, but I think it's important not to feel disappointed that she didn't write the dance called Barberini's Tambourine. I think what's important is the very strong possibility, not that she wrote the dance, but that she danced it, So that's a form of connection that we have with this remarkable, talented and dynamic woman from the past. So that's thing 2. So that's a person. So this more or less brings me to my next point, which is a concept that I've talked about in other places, and it is that English country dance in its classic form, and we can talk in discussion about how we have modified that in the last 100 years. But if you look at it as a historical phenomenon, that it is really a Baroque art form. And I mean that in dual senses, both that it is Baroque and that it is an art form. And it's easy enough to find critics, literary critics, art historians, architecture historians who are happy to talk about what characterizes the Baroque in the forms in which they specialize, but most of them have no knowledge whatever, certainly of social dance, many of them very little about what would have been called professional or fancy dance in the period, and really not at all about English country dance. But if you look at the period of English country dance's real efflorescence, its real, not its, maybe its birth, which I've talked about at the beginning in the middle and early 16th century, but when it really bursts forth in the middle 17th century, we are in the heart of the Baroque at that period historically. And so that whole flowering takes place over the next 150 years, at which point the Baroque and then the Rococo styles are really have the stage across Europe. And so it's truly a Baroque art form in a number of ways. And one is, if you have occasion to look at certainly what they would have called fancy dance or French dance in the period, if you have a chance to look at what's called the Beauchamp-Fourier notation system, which is a bird's eye view notation system of what the floor tracks look like. There's the degree to which those floor tracks seen from above look like Baroque art, particularly Baroque decorative art, carries over into versions of that used for country dance, or the French would have called contre-dance, right? That reality is something that was very well understood by the English artist William Hogarth, because in his book called The Analysis of Beauty, he talks about English country dance, particularly the beautiful S curves described by the figures executed by dancers, as the paradigm of beautiful style to him. but that beauty is contained in that S-curve. And here we are back really at the underlying principle of the hay, which, as I said, is the tension and release pattern, the out and back, going one direction and then going the other. And this is exemplified more than 100 years, almost 200 years after Sir John Davies in the analysis of beauty. And then he uses it in one of the principal illustrations to the book, which is reproduced in the Playford Assembly. And I apologize, it's small because the piece itself is unfolds and is fairly large, but it's not hard to find good full-size reproductions of that large engraving from the analysis of beauty that shows a long ways English country dance in progress. And not all the dancers look marvelous, but guess what? In 2020, they don't all look marvelous either. And up in the corner is his kind of sketchy version of a Beauchamp Fourier notation of a floor track, dance floor track in progress. So that is all true. It is also true in the sense of that the Baroque is an expressive style that features moving out to a kind of extreme. If you think about the sculptures of Bernini and the sort of throne gestures, it moves out to a kind of extreme, but the artist's mastery controls the impulse and brings it back together toward harmony. And that is often a function of the dance form itself, and that there is a kind of exuberance in the expression in the movement and the wildness, but order is brought back into play eventually. So it's Baroque in that sense too. And I think, given our time, I will move right along and we'll put a cap on that for a moment. So I want to move on to a related concept, and maybe I'll keep it brief. One of the questions from you says, what are the status of future books by Graham Christian? Well, I am underway with a supplement to the Playford Assembly, which will be another 24 dances that either for some reason eluded me or have come to my attention, or I have decided that we're ready for them in some other way. So it'll be new dances, same format, same idea. One of them I'm working on is called The Salutation. Around 1710, Playford, beautiful English hornpipe. That means a 3/2 hornpipe. And the salutation, I won't describe it at great length, but I will say that many years ago when I was first learning English country dance, I struggled with this title. I thought, why the salutation? What difference could that possibly make? And it's taken this long for me to understand how important deportment, relationship, rank, deference, and respect, but the respect was often mutual, was in English country dance of this period. And this is a time when, not that it was a kind of a one vote for all democracy, it was fairly oligarchic, which should seem familiar now, but it was a fairly oligarchic period, but that the dance form as we know it was very much concerned with self-presentation and respectful presentation to others. So the minuet opened with paying honors to the presence, their highest ranking person in the room, and then to your partner. And some of the English country dances that we have incorporate that. So if you think of something like Never Loved Thee More, the modern interpretation folds the honors into the doing of the dance. The modern interpretation of Mulberry Garden folds honors into the doing of the dance. It's not accurate in the sense that if we were historical dancers, we wouldn't do that anymore. We would do honors at the beginning and then stop. We would do the dance itself. But it reminds us how important that was. And the salutation is really all about that. It's all about that. And the principal challenge of the salutation, as you'll see when the supplement comes out, and some of you have danced it with me, is that it requires of you time to pay respect to your new neighbor, and then to your corner, and then to hold the whole set, and so on. But that it was absolutely crucial. And dance manuals of the period talk about deportment. Sometimes they rank that above learning anything else about dance. How to stand and how to walk and how to enter a room, how to show respect by the manner of your carriage. And then it follows that the next step would be how to apply understanding your deportment to dealing respectfully with your neighbor, your partner, your corner, and your whole set. So the salutation and deportment. So let me move on for now to my last thing. Yes.
We have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Lindsay, do you think now's a good time because they're topical to what you were just speaking of, or would you rather take them at the end?
Whatever you like, whatever you like.
Okay. Suzanne was asking what part of the 18th century was this behavior prevalent?
Can you say which behavior?
Let's see.
Is this Suzanne Ford?
I'm not sure. I'm waiting to see if she texts back. Hold on, let me see.
Would you like me to bring Suzanne onto audio so she
Sure,
can?
yes, it is Suzanne Ford. Yes, that would be great.
We're bringing you online now.
Do we have her? Say hi, Suzanne.
Just a moment.
Oops.
All right, Suzanne, you are welcome to start your video if you'd like.
Oh, I shall. I even got dressed for the occasion. There we are. Woohoo.
Hi there.
Hello there.
Hello. I was just wondering, this deportment, this important presentation, we can see it a little bit in even the modern day recreations of Jane Austen novels. Was this throughout the 18th century?
Effectively, yes.
More in the end?
So the answer is kind of twofold. So the this little spate of making sure that honors are interjected into the execution of country dances is a phenomenon of the mid-1680s in the Playford sources, in the Playford collections. So all the way back to the 1680s. And it probably, I'm going to go out on a limb, it may partly be the pressure of the minuet, which is really becoming big at this time. And it's not that honors weren't paid before, but I think that there was a determination to make sure that you did it and as part of your country dance experience as well as your minuet experience. So that's all the way back to the 1680s. But you start getting treatment of deportment and carriage in manuals from the 1710s, 1730s, and then the advice gets repeated and occasionally not much modified, sometimes copied word for word, but occasionally dumbed down for children, interestingly. So it turns up in education manuals for how to be a young lady and a young gentleman all the way through the end of the 18th century. So your answer really is all the way through.
Can we infer from that that a public dance would have been a very formal occasion? Or the dancing would have been formal?
Much more formal than we think of dancing as being.
Mm.
There are, and I'm going to qualify my answer slightly by saying that there often some dance occasions were presentation periods for dancing masters and their schools to show off what they had done in the period, or over what we would call a term. And then there were large public assemblies, and those would have been, again, more formal than we think of them as being. That doesn't mean that people didn't show up bombed and didn't make mistakes and didn't have quarrels, and they did all those things. But there are also literary references to country dances in country settings, which seem to be at pains to refer to how sweaty people get, how red-faced they get, how free their gestures are, which is probably meant to build a contrast to what their genteel readers would have expected to experience in urban assemblies. Does that help at all?
Oh,
So,
yeah. The more things change, the more they stay the same. visit.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Suzanne.
My pleasure. You can.
We will take more along the way.
Good. So shall I do my fifth thing, and then we'll go freely into audience or other participant questions?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. So so the last person I want to talk about actually is someone modern, and I think in many ways too little known. And he was a fellow named Carl Whitman, and I did not meet him personally, although his lifetime overlapped with mine. But Carl Whitman was a fascinating figure. Like a lot of people involved in English country dance, a graduate of Swarthmore College, including me. I'm another graduate. And he was a real pioneer in a kind of a theoretics of actually of gay male life. So he wrote a manifesto about gay male life, but he was also a pioneer figure in the recuperation of English country dance and Scottish country dance. And from I think it was the late, from the 1970s, 70 or so forward, well, he was a certified HTDS teacher, and like Cecil Sharp before him, he became very interested in the original sources of English country dance, and he had the wonderful insight that what was meritorious about the English country dance tradition had very little to do with gender, had very little to do with where you were. It had to do with who you were in any one given moment. And so he really pioneered calling, teaching, understanding the English country dance without reference to gender. And he pioneered that out on the West Coast as part of a Shakespeare festival. And that really impelled, drove forward English country dancers, both on the West Coast and later on the East Coast, to follow in the tradition. And that's the tradition in which I started to call English country dance. When I first started to teach it, I taught it without any reference to gender. And I can refer you to the website called the Heather and Rose. Brooke Friendly and Chris Sackett are really central for Heather and Rose, and they are very powerful continuers of his tradition. And my old home dance in Boston, in Jamaica Plain, they are powerful continuers of that tradition. And you can find them through lcfd.org if you like, or you can Google Heather and Rose for more about what Brooke and Chris and their dancers are up to.
That is a great website.
It's really good. And I regret that I never met him. But I used I think one of his wonderful quotations as one of the epigraphs for the Playford Assembly, which I'm just gonna read for you. Because I think it can't really be bettered. It's from his country dance manual from 1977. The country dance form can be thought of as an exquisite vessel, in itself beautiful in shape, highly abstract. We can choose to fill this vessel with whatever meaning we like. If we like, we can pursue a particular friendship. We can rejoice in a sense of community. We can see in the music and dance the highest of spiritual values. We can see it as good fun. The dance is all of these and greater than all of them. And as teachers and dancers, we must strive to perceive the dance in its most abstract and neutral form so as not to impose our particular meaning onto others. The wonderful treasure which has been passed down to us is the spirit, infrastructure. This has manifested itself in various ways through the centuries and continues today in this new form. So I think it's hard to better that as a reason to do our dance form. And it's wonderful, I think, to have not only figures from a relatively distant past, like Sir John Davies or Barbara Campanini to look to, because what we are doing is not a museum, right? It should be a living form. And we know that it's a living form because just a few days ago, I received a copy of Gary Rudman's newest book of dances, and on it goes. And that's as it should be. All right, so that was 5 things: the Hay, Barbara Campanini, the English country dance as the Baroque, the salutation and deportment, and the late great Carl Whitman. And Darlene, I think I'm going to look at the questions that I received a little earlier today, and we'll look through some of those and talk through them.
That sounds great. And
Okay.
now I think you all out there understand why I called this the dancing mind up, because that was certainly a dance of so many different things that you took us on. So thank you. Yes, please address. And I added another one, or there is an open one here in the Q&A panel. I'm not sure if you can see that, but we have several questions ahead of it. So feel
Okay.
free to.
If I seem to have forgotten anything, just let me know. Actually, let me tackle. I got one earlier from you today. Let me just tackle that quickly because it's more historical, and then I'll move to more general questions.
Great.
And the question was, did English country dance develop among peasants or the nobility or upper class? And the answer is yes, no, maybe. This is very problematic. It's very problematic. There's always been a very strong desire to see in English country dance, because it is called country dance, to see in it the pure folk, a pure expression of folk culture without the interruption of too much money or education or snobbery or class or anything. And that's extremely hard to prove. And the question is muddied by the fact that the English themselves, episodically, liked to think of English country dance as being rural and pure. But even as they did it, they were creating dances that were essentially urban and bourgeois entertainments. And sometimes those urban and bourgeois entertainments then went out into country districts and became adopted by the folk as their own. It is extremely hard to ascertain whether, even in the first edition of 1651, if those dances, even some of them that have tempting titles that are temptingly like things that are turned up in other sources as folk or sound like rural products like Trenchmore and the Shaking of the Sheets and so, Old Man is a Bed Full of Bones and all those things, it's very tempting to think that, oh yes, so it turns up in Playford in 1651. So there it is, transcribed for you. Trenchmore is exactly what they did in 1550. We have no idea. We just don't know. If you don't have even a hint of a choreography from 1550 under the name Trenchmore, and it looks the same as or something like Playford 1651, how the hell can you know? We just don't know what they're doing out in the villages. What you can look at is some dances are temptingly unusual, or dances like oaken leaves, or simple rounds. You go back and forth. Dances that involve token taking, kissing games, oddball dances like Dargison. These look like, in evolutionary terms, offshoots that are not later on developed in English country dance. That in the later 17th century, as it becomes a more and more squarely bourgeois and upper bourgeois form, and or in even a genteel form, that they don't follow the lead of Dargison. They don't follow the lead of those earlier and simpler dances. Epping Forest is a good example, a lead that isn't followed, right? So perhaps those dances were, like the appendix in the human body, something that's not followed up later on and just sits there for you. What we can say is that certainly by 1670, 1680, that whatever that form is begins to be washed out, and the dances are principally the product of an urban environment, really. And as I promised, some of them then get out into the villages. Certainly in the 18th century, something like drops of brandy, or buttered peas. These are 18th century printed dances that get out into the villages with relatively little interruption and stay there for 100 years. And by the time they've been danced out there for 40, 50, 60 years, the country folk of England have no idea that they originate in a genteel source of 1790. No idea. So, all right, so let me roll on to something else.
Oh, can I just interject
Yes,
for a
please.
minute? Because this is a learning experience, as we said. And Lindsay was telling me that it wasn't obvious what that question was. So we had a question from Seth, who said, were the people we're talking about have been from affluent and higher levels of society. Public dances were not truly public for everyone. And I think you more or less answered that, but just in case you didn't understand what the original question was, it was more or less that. And then we had a similar question from someone written in on the survey for Zoom. So
Yes. Yes.
Go ahead, Graham.
Okay. Let me take an easy one. What is my favorite dance? And my favorite dance, in fact, is Mount Hills from right around 1700. And for those of you who know the dance, you may be surprised because it's not complex, but to me, it perfectly exemplifies what an English country dance should do. It is lively, it's joyous. I certainly can love a serious dance or a slow dance, but for the most part, I dance to enjoy myself, as they would have in the 18th century. And Mount Hills, for me, is ideal because it engages all the relationships. So the leading couple, the ones, do something with each other, but in and around the twos. So the twos have to be involved in some way. And then the twos do the same. And then you have a relationship with your corner and with your corner, and then all four together, and then it's a circle. And then everyone turns single. So you're all together, but separate. And then everyone reunites with partner, back to back, and then the progression to move on. So I think that's just a wonderful dance, because to me, a wonderful dance is about the relationships. It's about the series of elusive, indefinable, joyous relationships you have with all of the people dancing with you. It's not the only dance that does that. Really, any good dance should. And that happens to be my favorite, but there are other dances that are fascinating too.
I have just posted a link for the fabulous Germantown dancers on video on YouTube. So if somebody wants to go afterwards and check that out.
Good. So I have a couple of other questions discussing let me see. One question says, it would be cool to have opportunities to share and expand our repertoires, although this may not be the correct format for that. I think it's a wonderful idea. This is probably too small a venue in a way, right? Too small a format. Like a webinar of a set time is hard to do that kind of sharing and expanding repertoires. But I think it's a wonderful idea. And I'm going to guess that our questioner is probably part of the English country dance discussion list. And that's a good place to start talking about that if you haven't already. I always think that a place to start is to get the core books, get Playford Ball, get Playford Assembly. There's the Boston Center little pamphlet dance series that is really wonderful to have, and that has both historical and modern dances. And then once you're comfortable with that repertoire, I think that's a great time to start talking to the other callers and seeing what they have and seeing what you like. What do you specifically look for when reading a room's ability? What tells you a dance is too easy or too hard? Well, there's actually quite a large repertoire of easy but gratifying dances. And I think that particularly if you're new to a community, that you can't go wrong by selecting from the easy dances. We're starting with something easy. You could start with something like Maids Morris or Alice, if you're in that mood, and seeing how the dancers respond to that. Part of what you're looking for is how people manage themselves in a space and how well they understand interacting in a space with others. I think that's what you're looking for. Let me see if there was anything else.
I know we have a lot of Jane Austen and Regency era fans. I was wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit about that, because when Graham was last out here visiting, he promised that he would do a workshop for us regarding those dances that he doesn't often get to teach. So let's talk about that for a few minutes.
Sure. The dances changed a good deal over the course of the 18th century. At the very beginning of the 18th century, which some dancers, some callers think of as kind of a golden period. You have these very ingenious, dedicated choreographers like Kynaston who are working on these unique, sort of irreproducible, sort of idiosyncratic little masterpieces, Humors of the Age or the She Favorite or something like that. As the century goes on, and the form becomes more and more widely accessible, and the public assemblies become larger, and balls, more private balls become more popular, there are more and more music publishers eager to get in on the business and capitalize on it. So somewhat less care is exercised in the creation of dances and the matching of tunes and dances together. You'll sometimes have some callers, some musicians grouse a little about the later 18th century tunes or dances, which seem less interesting or less idiosyncratic. But I think what you're looking at is that the expectation is no longer, as it would have been in the earlier 18th century, that there's a limited stock of new dances per year, maybe from 2 or 3 publishers, each doing about 24 new dances per year, and that you would learn those dances, and those would be the principal dances danced in the season. But if you're now having publishers cranking out big anthologies of 200 dances, and then also several publishers publishing annuals, you can't keep up with all that stuff, and you're not really expected to. What they're doing is generating tunes and workable dance tracks for them. So one of the things that you can think about for the dance of Jane Austen's period is finding tunes that you like and tracks that you like and making them work together. And there were, in fact, how-to guides, there were manuals, in effect, that would allow people to make those matches correctly if for some reason they didn't like the series of figures that the publisher had supplied with a particular tune. So there was that. And the other thing that I'll come and do with Darlene's group, I hope next year, is because something that rose, or one might say rose like a phoenix from the ashes, was the cotillon or the cotillion, which is a 4-couple square dance. And we sometimes blithely say that the set dance in English country dance died in 1670 and didn't come back again until the early 1930s. But you can look at it, take another perspective and say that the cotillon, which arose in the mid-1760s, was a way of reviving a set dance. So the cotillon had a fixed series of what they called, confusingly, changes. They still called changes of rights and lefts changes, but these fixed figures would apply to any cotillon or cotillion. So they would be circles and stars for all, or for the man or the women and so forth, or canterns and so on. So once you knew that set of figures, and there was a slight variation, some had 8, or some dancing masters had 8 and some had 9, and some slight differences in the order. But once you knew them, those would not change, like of a double siding and arming. So that you wouldn't have to have explained to you, oh, by the way, we're going to do up a double before we do the thing. So each cotillon, the new cotillon, would have the thing that you do that is the special feature of the cotillon, the figure. And then you would do the next figure, whatever that was, the next star, the next circle. So you do the next one. And that, as far as we can discern, was really starting to take over the field from English country dance, and probably contributed to the decline in originality of English country dance figures, because the creativity was being applied to the cotillons. So that's what I will come and do for Darlene's group next year. So we'll do a mixture of some of the nicer, because there are actually some nice long ways dances still in that period, and we'll do some cotillons as well.
Suzanne asked, what about the practice of the most prominent lady choosing the dance or dance steps? And you spoke to us about this when you came out for your tea talk.
Yes. And we know that this was true, and we know that this was true partly because, well, it's referenced in a number of sources. Thomas Wilson at the turn of the 19th century specifically addresses his guide for how to generate your own English country dance depending on the tune length and the number of repetitions of the tune. He's really addressing that to the first lady. So one of the things that fascinates me is, and perhaps will bear further research, maybe we will find out sometime, is that we don't know how long this was in practice. In other words, that we can discern that by the end of the 18th century, it's the first lady who's calling the shots. But we don't know how long that had been true. That might have been true for decades, which is a very interesting notion. Certainly the dance directions in the 18th century are written to the first man, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he selected it. So that's a very interesting idea. But yes, so one of the things that I was talking about, rank, order, preference, and deportment and all that stuff. So one of the things that was understood was that in any given assembly, private or public, that the first ranking lady selected the first dance. That and she literally called it. That's what that meant at the time. The calling was not prompting. Calling was not teaching. Calling was selecting it, calling the tune. So she would select the tune in the dance, and then she and her partner would dance that down to the bottom and back. And then she was done, and it would go to the next ranking lady. One unanswered question for me is how long this would have gone on. How many first ladies can you possibly accommodate in one evening of dance? It's a little bit unclear. There were also, and particularly in this country, but in some, in a private setting, the Duchess of Whatnot would be first, and then Lady Whatnot would be next, and so on, right? So that would be pretty easy to figure that out. But in a more public assembly, when perhaps you had a mixture of lower aristocracy and gentry and the bourgeois, it might be a little harder to determine. You might not want to have a quarrel that would have to be settled by the master of ceremonies. So lots could be drawn to select the first ladies in their ranking. And you can discern that that's obviously very important in this country, certainly post 1776, when no one wants to concede that they are lower ranking, except perhaps if General and Lady Washington turn up, will you of course give her first shot, but anybody else, you would really want to draw lots and determine who was next.
Wow, very interesting. We are coming close to the end of our hour.
Indeed we are. Are there any burning questions I should answer?
Lindsay, I'm not sure if you've been fielding anything on Facebook that didn't get answered. A lot of times you started talking and things got answered. Let's hear from Lindsay for a minute and thank her so much for managing so many things behind
Thank you,
the
Lindsay.
scenes.
My pleasure. We are actually experiencing a little bit of freezing on the Facebook side right now, so I'm working on that.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Darlene, go ahead and check through the messages I've sent you. You'll see
Right.
all the questions that I have seen thus far.
Great.
okay. Quickly, while we're doing that, I know we're about to be out of time, which is just fine. But so the question about future books, I am working on a supplement. I was hoping 2020, but maybe it'll be 2021 for another 24 country dances, historical country dances. That book will also include a comprehensive index that will index all of the dances from itself, but also from Playford Assembly and Playford Ball. So if you buy that 24 country dances for the year 2021, then you can use that index and say which of those historical dance sources is that dance in, and you can find that very easily. I had a very interesting question about whether I would write piano dance transcriptions or reinterpretations of harmonies for dance tunes, and that seems like a big project. I'm not sure that I'm the person to take that on, but that's a fascinating idea and maybe something that someone else will pick up if I don't. Last thing, one thing that is in motion in our dance world is a terminology. There's been talk about larks, robins, ravens, whether to use the term gypsy or not. And I think what I would say from historical perspective is that dance language always reflects the society of which it is a part. It seems to me that we are in a period of discovery about exactly how we want to proceed. And I think it'll just be fascinating to see how we come down. I am actively considering for future editions of the Playford Assembly replacing the term gypsy. I think I've been convinced that some find it injurious. So I think that's well worth thinking about. And the next thing we will want to think about, it's very pertinent for Contra. We will want to think about as a community about how we feel about first lady, first man, second woman, second man, and so on. So we want to think about it as a community, how we feel about that. So stay tuned.
Well, we really want to thank you so much for being part of our very first web series. There is a link for donating. We can donate directly for these people that do all this work behind the scenes in our community that we so rely on and use all the time. So please, you can donate directly through Graham's projects on PayPal, through his website, his email address, which I posted and I will post again. You can also donate on our Historical Tea and Dance Society website, and those donations will go forward. So
and also if you prefer, I absolutely, particularly in our current situation, if you prefer to make a donation to a local musician or caller local to you, I absolutely encourage that. So that's wonderful too.
We are all working hard on making sure everybody is surviving well, because we rely on all of you, on you, Graham, and all our musicians and our callers and all our people that work so hard in the community with helping with events and all that. So thank you. And we really, really, really appreciate it. Join us next week when we host Joanna Reiner. And for those who want to go to Historical Tea and Dance Friends on Facebook, you can join us for a meetup chat. So that's happening right after this, which Lindsay is going to help us get going. But Graham, I can't thank you enough for being our first person. It was so great to hear from you. Fascinating. I took lots of notes. If you saw me like looking away, I was scribbling frantically all these wonderful notes. And
great honor to be the first. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it. thank you all for stopping in, everyone. And, send us your comments, emails, suggestions, whatever. We're open to everything. Thank you, and stay safe. And we'll see you on the dance floor just as soon as we can get back there.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.